Part 3. Ladies and gentlemen, I have truly saved the best for last, because what you're going to be learning in this video is the pinnacle of all true and lasting change: identity. I'm going to explain right now what I mean by identity. First of all, the concept of the self-image and how it governs. It literally controls. It doesn't just influence, but controls what we think, what we do, what we feel, even our believed capabilities. They're all governed by the way that we think of ourselves. So I'm going to explain that concept and why it's so powerful, and then I'm going to give you some concrete strategies to manipulate that version of yourself that you believe yourself to be so that it is more in line with the ideal. So let's jump right in. So if you remember from part 1 of the series, I referenced a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And in that book, Clear mentions a little bit about identity towards the beginning of the book. And that's perfectly fine. He makes some nice observations, and he alludes a little bit to the power of the identity and its relationship to habits, and then of course vice versa, the relationship that habits have back to identity, and how one shapes the other and the other shapes the other. So that's perfectly fine, but the real gold when it comes to understanding the role that identity plays in our lives and how it governs literally everything that we do comes from right here: Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. I'm going to read you a little bit from this book to give you an idea of what we're talking about here in this video before we move on to the strategies. So here we go, okay? The self-image. Here's what it is. The self-image is our own conception of the sort of person that I am. It has been built up from our own beliefs about ourselves, but most of these beliefs about ourselves have unconsciously been formed from our past experiences. You know this already, right? Once an idea or a belief about ourselves goes into this picture, it becomes true as far as we personally are concerned. We do not question its validity, but proceed to act upon it just as if it were true. So if I believe myself to be smart, I'm going to take the exam with confidence. If I believe myself to be good with women, I'm going to approach the pretty girl with confidence. I was going to say like with ease of mind, calm, whatever. But it's going to be easy and very natural because, hey, that's just who I am, right? This self-image becomes a golden key to living a better life because of two important discoveries. Number one, all of your actions, feelings, behaviors, and even your abilities are always consistent with this self-image. In short, you will act like the sort of person you conceive yourself to be. And in fact, you literally cannot act otherwise, in spite of all your conscious efforts or willpower. The man who conceives himself to be a failure-type person will find a way to fail, in spite of all his best intentions or his willpower, even if opportunity is literally dumped right on his lap. The person who conceives himself to be a victim of injustice, one who was meant to suffer, will invariably find circumstances to verify this opinion. The self-image is a premise, a base, or a foundation upon which your entire personality, your behavior, and even your circumstances are built. Because of this, our experiences seem to verify and thereby strengthen our self-images, and a vicious, or ideally a beneficent cycle, as the case may be, is set up. And number two, the self-image can be changed. And this is where it gets very exciting. The self-image can be changed. And numerous experiments have shown that once the concept of self is changed, other things that are consistent with the new concept of self are accomplished easily and without strain. All right, now there are three main perspectives that I want to share with you here on how to go about actually changing this self-image to make it more in line with what you want it to be, rather than what it just sort of ended up becoming, right? Because of our past experiences and so forth. So the first one comes from Clear himself, from the original book that I referenced in part 1. The basic process that he states is quite simple, and it's respectable, I have to say. But it gets more interesting than this. But here it is, okay? So number one, decide the type of person you want to be. It's pretty simple, right? You want to know exactly what you want to become first. So whether that be a reader or an early riser or a genius or whatever it is, you decide it very clearly, and then with that, I think also is assumed that you understand what types of activities that kind of identity carries with it. So if you're a genius, then that means you read a lot, or you study a lot, or you take exams really well, whatever it is, and that way you know what it is you're chasing, what it is you're after. And number two to this two-step process is to prove it to yourself with small wins. Okay, now I'll give you a little bit more context that come from around that two-step process that he says. The more you repeat a behavior, the more you reinforce the identity associated with that behavior. The more evidence that you have for a belief, the more strongly you will actually believe it. We do not change by snapping our fingers and deciding to be someone entirely new. We change bit by bit, day by day, habit by habit. So in other words, we change slowly and by tacking on new habits very firmly rather than trying to capture all at once, go from not working out at all to going to the gym 5 days a week every single week of our life. You know what I mean? That doesn't generally happen very well. That doesn't generally happen successfully or for very long. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. The most practical way to change who you are is to change what you do. And this is probably the most important observation that Clear makes. Each habit not only gets results, which is kind of like the whole reason we're doing this, right? But it also teaches you something far more important, and that is to trust yourself. And that's where the identity comes in. Let's move on to perspective 2. All right, now I had to include this perspective because I just find it so mind-blowing. If you remember from last week, part 2 of the series, I told you that I was going to contradict myself, because what I was saying is something along the lines of, don't pressure yourself with too many or too high of expectations. Take it slow and, be kind to yourself with what you expect out of yourself. This is the exact opposite of that. And it's not, it's contradictory in that it's like the exact opposite approach, but it's not contradictory as in like it's bashing patience and kindness and so forth. It's not like that, but let me just read it to you here and you'll understand what I'm saying. Okay, this is where instead of taking things slowly, you flip the switch and you go from one role to another role in a snap, and it's just kind of like you embrace the awkwardness in the beginning. Let me just read it to you. Let me just read it. While incremental change might be necessary for the person who has been traumatized and thus needs a sense of safety, taking baby steps may not be the best solution for most people. Consider a practical trading example. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned the book. It's The Psychology of Trading by Brett and Steenbarger. I recently reached the point where my research in trading had been going sufficiently well that it was time to increase my size. Nevertheless, I found myself balking at the move. No doubt I was being extra cautious lest my hard-won confidence turn out to be overconfidence. No one ever overcame a fear by avoiding it, however. Instead of increasing my size incrementally, and just slowly, which would have been a concession to my fear, I decided to immediately double my positions for my normal trades. Making this leap was my way of using my actions to reinforce confidence, much as I had done as Jack's therapist. That's from a story back in before. I may not have felt totally confident, but I was going to act on the premise of confidence and thereby reinforce confidence. So basically what he's saying is that when you take it incrementally, if he did do that, then he'd basically be admitting to his fear, admitting that his fear has a certain amount of credibility, a certain amount of like legitimate reason to it, rather than, now he has the fear, he has a little bit of the fear, but because he knows his research backs confidence, he acts on that even though it feels uncomfortable, because now he knows it's reinforcing that confidence. So he's jumping into the water and he says, I realized that I was creating a whole new role for myself. I had always thought of myself as a small trader. I knew that I would never change this identity by nudging my size higher and becoming a less small trader. Does that make sense? Isn't this amazing? I'm going to kind of skip ahead now. I won't pretend that this was an easy period for my trading. Continually reassuring myself that these were the same trades that I had been making successfully. So he's saying, you know, there's nothing new here other than the psychological feeling that there's something more significant because it's a higher size. And again, I guess I didn't say this. This is just, you know, this is a trading book, but you take this wisdom and apply it to pretty much anything else in your life, right? Like if I identify myself as I'm trying to think of a good example. Like if I approach, you know, new people and I believe myself to be a social recluse and I'm trying to nudge myself to become less and less socially reclusive, that's going to reinforce the whole credibility or perceived credibility behind the whole notion that I am, you know, that there's a good reason behind being socially recluse versus just flipping the switch and talking to everybody. You know what I mean? So it's just dramatic shift, and it feels uncomfortable at first because it's like, oh, this is new, but it's a new role versus a slightly stretched same role. I hope that makes sense. Let me just read a little bit more and then we'll move on. So he takes this trade. As the trade turned profitable, I found my normal calm confidence returning. I could appreciate that this really was no different from my other trades, size notwithstanding. I took my profits, but I didn't feel elated. To the contrary, it seemed routine. I was adjusting to the leap, and it was feeling more normal. It was becoming part of me. If traders have the courage to stick with their leaps, they have the potential to internalize a new set of experiences and to draw a radically different map of the self. Okay, last thing, and then we'll move on. If you want to achieve an ideal, shift your actions radically in the direction of that ideal and spend enough time in that mode to internalize the results. If you have defined your desired end reasonably and stick with the initial awkwardness, you will have created a whole new role for yourself. Let's move on. All right, last but not least, I'm sure you're curious to hear what Maltz himself has to say on this subject, the person that gave us the whole concept of the self-image and, you know, how its power to change our lives. What does he say is the most effective way of going about actually changing this self-image for the better, making it a healthier one to actually serve us rather than hinder us? So in the chapter following the self-image chapter, what Maltz defines is this thing called the success mechanism, which is basically his term for referring to the subconscious mind, like the nervous system. And this nervous system, the important thing to understand about it, and is a little bit of background before I go into this, is that it is mechanical. It works like a machine in that whatever inputs you feed it, it will respond to those without bias, without favor. So that if you feed it with negative thoughts, it will respond with, you know, anxiety and so forth. If you feed it with negative images in your imagination, then it will respond the same with anxiety. And of course, the flip side is true as well. So this is what he says about that success mechanism. Every human being has been literally engineered for success by his creator. Every human being has access to a power greater than himself. You do not need to be an electronic engineer or a physicist to operate your own servo mechanism. He's talking about this, he's using a metaphor to talk about the subconscious mind, any more than you have to be able to engineer an automobile in order to drive one, or become an electrical engineer in order to turn on the light in your room. You do not need to be familiar with the following concepts, however. You do need to be familiar with the following concepts, however, because when you have memorized them, they will throw new light on what is to follow. Number one, your built-in success mechanism must have a goal or target. This goal or target must be conceived of as already in existence now, either in actual or potential form. It operates by either 1, steering you to a goal already in existence, or 2, discovering something already in existence. And number 2, the automatic mechanism is teleological. That is, it operates or must be oriented to end results goals. Do not be discouraged because the means whereby may not be apparent. It is the function of the automatic mechanism to supply the means whereby when you supply the goal. Think in terms of the end result, and the means whereby will often take care of themselves. Number 3, do not be afraid of making mistakes or of temporary failures. All servo mechanisms achieve a goal by negative feedback or by going forward, making mistakes, and immediately correcting course. He actually earlier in the book talks about this in reference, in like metaphor to a torpedo, because that's how it works. The torpedo goes forward, and as it goes off course, it continually adjusts until finally it's going perfectly towards its goal, and then it gets there. I think that's how it works anyway. Number 4, skill learning of any kind is accomplished by trial and error, mentally correcting aim after an error until a successful motion, movement, or performance has been achieved. After that, further learning and continued success is accomplished by forgetting the past errors and remembering the successful response so that it can be imitated. So what he's saying here is that instead of dwelling on when it went wrong and allowing your attention and your memory to be consumed by the pain and the disappointment, the frustration of the failure, and living there, remember that tiny bit of success, even if it's tiny, or if it's great, it could be radical, like we learned just with psychology of trading. And if you remember that, and you dwell there, and you cultivate it in your mind, and you embellish on it, and you let it flourish, then it becomes easier and easier to remember what was necessary to make that response, and that will be the more and more natural response in the future. Number 5, you must learn to trust your creative mechanism to do its work and not jam it by becoming too concerned or too anxious as to whether it will work or not, or by attempting to force it by too much conscious effort. You must let it work rather than make it work. This trust is necessary because your creative mechanism operates below the level of consciousness, and you cannot know what is going on beneath the surface. Moreover, its nature is to operate spontaneously according to the present need. Therefore, you have no guarantees in advance. It comes into operation as you act, and as you place a demand on it by your actions. You must not wait to act until you have proof. You must act as if it is there, and it will come and it will come through. Do the thing, and you will have the power. Okay, last thing before I wrap up, because I know there's a lot here, but this is very important as well. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between an actual experience and one that is vividly imagined. So what he's saying is that when you imagine an experience going well, it's as if you actually tasted that success. And when you imagine it regularly, this is called visualization. You taste that success, and you align the creative success mechanism with that successful image. It will naturally, by its own intelligence, without your even conscious effort, it will naturally align itself in its motion, its forward action towards that vision of success. And so now, instead of envisioning failure and imagining the 10,000 things that could go wrong, and then your success mechanism is making it so that you're trying your best, you're trying for it to go well, but your success mechanism is like, no, we're scared, I'm anxious, because I'm envisioning failure. You don't have divided intent, you don't have divided selves, you have one clear, natural, and easy forward path, and everything is aligned. And I hope you're as excited as I am. If we picture ourselves performing in a certain manner, it is nearly the same as the actual performance. I guess that's it. So, all right. To wrap up, not just the video, but also the entire series, what we've been talking about for 3 weeks now is lasting change. Which, if you think about it, another word that I could use there is real change, because change that doesn't last, it's not actually change. It's more of this game that we play, that we pick something up just to set it back down. We pick something up and we desperately try to hold on to it, but it just ends up being dropped again. And every time we drop it, of course, we feel worse than we did before. We end up discouraged and disappointed and even less likely to change, because we start feeling ashamed of ourselves. Why can't I achieve lasting change? And so my recommendation, my friends, to counter this issue in pretty much all of our lives, is to start with the topic introduced in this video, which is, of course, identity, but the self-image. The self-image, meaning that conception that we have of ourselves, of what we're like, what we're worth, what we're capable of, because everything that goes into that picture, if that picture ends up conflicting with our efforts, with our motivations and our efforts, then no amount of those efforts will ever be enough to actually achieve lasting change, because our image of ourselves doesn't allow it. So start there. Understand that its power, first of all, but also that it can be changed, and have hope, because now you have some real strategies for changing it, and the power, the hope that, once it's changed, it will make your efforts not only effective, but you won't have to strain as much, and everything will just feel more natural on your path to lasting change. Start here. And the last thing that I want to say is that, my friends, as comprehensive as I've tried to be in this video, for sake of time, I had to cut out a lot of stuff, and that's just speaking from what I've learned myself, what I've been exposed to. I'm sure that there's miles more that I've not even heard of or seen yet, and so just understand I tried my best, but I couldn't include everything. Dive deeper, and I want to thank you for sticking around with me this series, and I will see you next week.